Foremost in the armored spearhead of Space Marine armored formations is the Predator Assault Tank. Based upon the Rhino APC chassis, the Predator is armed with a formidable turret-mounted autocannon and las-cannon sponsons. Deployed at the head of advancing troops or moving rapidly across the battlefield, the Predator uses its heavy firepower to stop the enemy dead.
Hi, I'm Ed and welcome to Minisodes. I have 3 Predator tanks in my Blood Angels army. Tiny, lead, 6mm ones to be exact, but I've always wanted to get my hands on one of the original Rogue Trader Predators, or RTB-8s, released in April 1989. And now I finally have. Salvaged from the beleaguered planet eBay, this Predator's machine spirit is faint, and its previous chapter lost to memory. The autocannon has been snapped off, the spiked prow is in pretty bad shape, the turret is also missing the bit of plastic that allowed it to rotate, but that should be an easy fix. The aerials or flagpoles are also lost. The good news is that the tank is otherwise in good shape. The las cannons still swivel, the exhausts on top of the 4 manifolds are miraculously intact, and generally the model is free from any gouges, scrapes, or plastic glue meltage. With the diagnostic complete, it was time to get started. I used a large makeup brush to lift off any dust and accumulated muck, then brought out my trusty tub of BioStrip. I've never used BioStrip on a model of this size before, so used tweezers to drop each piece in the tub and gave it a good once-over with a large paintbrush. Satisfied that the Predator was properly coated, I transferred it all into a Ziploc bag so that the paint stripper could do its magic overnight. The next morning I laid down some cling film on my hobby desk and used an old electric toothbrush to gently scrub off the offending paintwork. Luckily for me, it became apparent that the previous owner had not used a primer on this model, allowing the paint to come away from the plastic really easily and without leaving too much staining. Whilst I slough off my Predator's old skin, I want to dedicate this episode to this month's new Minisodes patrons. A big thank you to Renegade5150, Jordan Gardner, Pointless with Circles, Warsmith Chris, Joe Von Seelen, Percent92, Tanis Jackson, Omar Juarez, Mayflower, JJ Duke, Carter, Dan F, Sam Walker, Dynamo Davo, Stephen Graves, Dr. Spork, Ignovus, David Switzer, and Upside Down Sam. A big thank you and a warm welcome to you all. And would you look at that, the Predator is nearly scrubbed clean. I changed tack at this point and used a toothpick and a bit of wire to pick out all the paint in those hard to reach places. With the Predator now back in its birthday suit, I could commence repairs. Starting with the turret, I drilled a hole for the autocannon to fit snugly and securely in, and whilst I was at it, drilled a gun barrel for the pintle-mounted bolter and the 6 smoke launchers using a smaller drill bit. After applying some plastic cement, I plugged the autocannon back into its housing. Sticking to the weapons, I tidied the mold lines, or flash, as I seem to remember people used to say, off the las cannon, and then drilled another hole into the big laser barrel. Pew, pew. I had a servitor pull the old spike ram off the chassis and glued on a replacement fresh from the chapter forge. Now, many of you will recognize this component and know that an intact Rhino rail is exceptionally rare, so I didn't take gluing these on lightly. Relic rails applied, I glued the las cannon sponsons in place, as unfortunately the plastic swivel mounts had perished utterly during the biostrip cleanup. For the turret banners, I used clear Tamiya plastic tubing. As a side note, I used this same tubing for the Rhino rails on my Blood Angels Rhino a few years back. The turret was also missing the hand grips that would normally be stuck onto the Rhino top hatch, and fortunately I had spares of these too and glued them in place. I capped off the banner poles with era-appropriate skulls belonging to the Skeleton Warriors plastic kit. Now, it was very important to me that the turret could swivel, so I opened up the hole in the center of the turret mount and glued another length of plastic tubing into the turret. Marvelous. At this point, I went back and forth on whether to add lots of stowage to this tank, similar to historical tanks. But in the end, I decided that I would take a more classic, clean approach, and aside from the minor addition of the skulls, leave the Predator as it was. The cleanup was complete, and after some lunch, I took the tank outside for a prime with Wraithbone spray. Whilst the primer dried, I looked through the Angels of Death Codex for inspiration. The plan was to combine these with a beautiful example found in Mike McVeigh's Warhammer 40,000 Heavy Metal Painting Guide. A classic tank deserved a classic approach. No dry brushing here, just a bold colour scheme with bright highlights and shading. For the red, I settled on Mephiston Red with Evil Suns and Wild Rider Red highlights, so a little darker than the more orangey heavy metal one. A few weeks ago at the UK Games Expo, I bought a big bag of synthetic brushes for this task and used the largest brush to apply a thin layer of Mephiston Red on the tank. I didn't go to great pains to avoid the areas I was going to paint black, just cracked on, working my way around the model using a small jar with blue tack as a rudimentary painting handle. Some of my coats were a little thin, but after multiple layers, I was left with a nice, smooth coat of arterial red. With that done, I switched to a smaller brush to get into the crevices and awkward bits. For the black, I used the Vallejo game model color range, starting with the grills on the sides, the autocannon barrel, the pintle-mounted bolter, and las cannons, before moving on to the tracks, spiked ram, and banner skulls. Reuniting the turret back on the chassis, I now had a fully painted two-tone tank. I used lead belcher on the las cannon and used the heavy metal guide closely to see where the gunmetal parts were on the Mike McVeigh version. With the cannon soundly lead belched, I moved on to the other metallic parts of the Predator, like the exhausts, tracks, handles, skulls, and bolter. For the first highlight on the black, I mixed Vallejo black with dark Reaper, then hit the top of the black areas. This is quite a subtle colour, so it allowed me to be bold with the size of the highlight. But I did need to exercise a bit more care when highlighting the Aquila on the back. During this process, I made a mental note of all the red areas I'd missed and stepped back over these quickly before moving on to the shading. All the metallic areas got a generous wash of Nuln Oil to dirty them up and add a bit more depth. The red was looking super flat, so I used Agrax Earthshade to pin wash the tank, hitting the bolts and carefully lining between the panels. This would add some shadow and definition to the details. I also washed the tracks with the Agrax Earthshade, which I will say at this point is as close to weathering as I got throughout the whole project. I wanted a nice, clean, 90s workshop tank. I added natural steel to the metal areas. In concert with the lead belcher and Nuln Oil, I really like this effect. Evil Sun Scarlet would be the first highlight on the red. Again, I applied a generous highlight here to hatches, panels, and the rails, anywhere the light would catch, taking a bit more care on the traditional edge highlights. More sparingly, I used Wild Rider Red, reducing the area of highlight down to the sharpest, almost raised edges. At this point, I decided I could go even further and used a few dots of Fire Dragon Bright on the sharpest corners to really lift that red. The last cannon fusel coil thing received a coat of Sons of Horus green, along with this Auspex on the turret, which was highlighted with Warpstone, Moot Green, then a dot of Moot Green and Uriel Yellow. The autocannon barrel needed a couple of kill stripes, and I used Avalon Sunset and Uriel Yellow to create that effect. Pulling out some transfer sheets, I stuck this big old Blood Angels chapter symbol on the side of the turret, using Microsol and Microset to get a smooth application. On the other side of the turret, I applied the unit number and alongside it, the company symbol. This is the third tank of the third company, Tycho's company. I wanted to give personality to the vehicle and its crew, so this white chapter symbol means that the commander is a veteran sergeant and squadron leader. And these Aquilas are the armored vehicle symbol of the Space Marines. I painted matte varnish over the transfers to take the gloss off and give them a bit of protection from the battles and handling in games to come. A few hand-painted flags are essential for a 2nd edition battle tank, so I made a design as a guide on Canva, printed it out, and after a spray with matte lacquer, sellotaped it down on the back of a sketchbook. I spent the better part of a morning carefully painting these flags, being really methodical, working up through the highlights until I was happy with the overall look. After another spray of matte lacquer, I cut them out with a scalpel and glued them in place with a few brushstrokes of PVA. When that was dry, I added additional highlights that followed the bendy contours of how I'd shaped these billowing flags. By the way, the name of the tank is Sanguinator, and the name of the squadron leader is Raphael. This is his tank. And this is just a skull. 'Cause Warhammer. So there we have it. From eBay rescue to resplendent Blood Angels assault tank, soon to be wreaking havoc upon the goblin green worlds of the 41st millennium. This took me 2.5 days to complete, and I'm really pleased with the result, especially considering the condition it was in initially. I do have a second Predator lying around in repose and in an even worse state, and I think that tank would be a good recipient for a grittier, more scale model-esque scheme, complete with stowage and plenty of weathering. Anyway, if you enjoyed this little hobby journey, then perhaps you'd be interested in joining my supporters over on Patreon, who make all of this possible. For less than a White Dwarf from 1995, you get access to a monthly Minisodes podcast and a Discord server full of lovely people, and dare I say it, even lovelier 90s hobby goodness. In this month's podcast, I sit down and talk all things Codex Angels of Death with an especially knowledgeable guest. It's a great discussion and well worth your time. Anyway, if that sounds of interest, it'd be great to see you there. The link is in the description. See you in 2 weeks. Thanks for watching, and happy hobbying.